Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Herman, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm Lex Frieden, your host. I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and I direct the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at Tier Memorial Herman. We're glad you joined us today. We have a special guest, and I'll introduce her right after we take a break. Before we take a break, however, I want to ask you a question, one that we'll answer before the end of today's program. That is, do you know what in Texas is the Sunset Commission? The Sunset Commission. We'll answer the question sometime during the course of today's program. Now, we'll be right back with Focus on Abilities. This is Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, and you're watching HTV. We have a guest today who is going to be very interesting, so please stay with us. This is Dr. Patricia Gray from the University of Houston Law School. Patricia, thanks for being our guest today.
Happy to be here.
Now, the reason I wanted you to come on the show today is partly because of your role with the Health Law Policy Institute at U of H, and partly because of your experience as a state legislator. So if you would please give us some of your background in that regard. I know you served in the legislature for a number of years, and you represented a district in Dallas, right?
Galveston.
Galveston, okay.
Yes. I came to the legislature the way many women come into politics, which is through volunteer work in my community. And a part of that volunteer work included managing the campaigns of my predecessor in office. He resigned and called and said, if you have any interest, you need to announce first. Otherwise, it will look as if I'm running you against whoever else gets in the race. So I had a very short period of time to think about it. It was something I was interested in. My law partners were very supportive, and before the day was out, I had made the decision and made an announcement and started making phone calls.
So you were practicing law in Galveston at that time?
I was practicing law in Galveston. I had two wonderful partners. We worked together for 18 years.
What kind of law were you practicing?
We had a general practice. We did real estate, probate, family law, a little bit of criminal work. I had a fun Deceptive Trade Practices Act case one time. And toward the end of my law practice, I had developed some expertise on long-term care issues, and so I did some ad litem work in planning for children who had suffered injuries who were going to need long-term care.
Oh, wow. So that led you then to your interests when you were elected to the legislature.
That's right. I was very interested in health care issues, long-term care issues. It was just kind of a natural fit for me.
Now, you had a great record as a member of the legislature, well known and with a great reputation. You were a Democrat, I think, but
yes,
despite that, you were very successful in achieving bipartisan support for a lot of the work that you did. That requires, in Texas, a good effort.
Well, you know, it's surprising once you get out on the floor. Sometimes you realize that not everything is a partisan issue. And so then the trick becomes, how do I find common ground as a legislator living on an island in the Gulf of Mexico with a guy whose background is oil and gas in Pampa, Texas? And I will tell you that that representative and I not only work together very well, but we're still friends today.
Oh, that's great. Among the legislation that you worked on, there was quite a bit that affected people with disabilities. You were at one point, I think, chair of the health committee?
I was. I also chaired something that you mentioned earlier in the program, the Sunset Commission, during a cycle when we were looking at reauthorizing the Texas Rehabilitation Commission.
Now, a lot of people probably don't know what the Sunset Commission is. That the state legislature has a responsibility after they pass a law to review its progress after a while and see if it's still relevant. Part of that involves oversight of state agencies, and those state agencies all have appropriations, and I guess the legislature through this commission reviews from time to time what the agencies are doing, correct?
That's correct. The goal is to see if their mission is still relevant, how well they're meeting their mission, and if there are ways to improve the services that that agency is supposed to provide.
And the Sunset Commission, I've observed over the years, very often makes some substantive recommendations and actually backs them up with additional funding or legislation from time to time to ensure that those agencies do stay relevant and improve services to people. In the case of the Rehabilitation Commission that you reviewed, it's always been a stable organization in Texas. Much of the money, I think, comes through federal appropriations,
yes,
but the state has to match that. So we have an investment clearly. What were your recollections of the role of the Rehabilitation Agency in Texas?
At the time I was there, there were a number of standalone entities that each provided services in their particular sphere. So, the Commission for the Blind served only the blind. The Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing served only the deaf and hard of hearing. The Rehabilitation Commission was focused primarily on people with mobility disability issues. One of the things that we started looking at in the time frame I was there was whether we could put some of those services together. There were some deaf people who had mobility issues. There were some people with mobility issues who had hearing issues or sight issues. And so trying to get those folks to start working together and move off their own turf just a little bit was something that we started looking at. It was difficult because people get comfortable, in their own arena. 10 years later, or not quite 10 years later, there was a big consolidation move in the Health and Human Services agencies. And you are seeing that same recommendation coming today. The consolidations are not over. The question now is how much further can we take it, and how effective will it be?
Well, you actually achieved a great deal in the work that you did at that time, and we'll talk more about the impact today and where we have to go today. But I want to take a short break right now. Patricia, thanks for being here today, and thank you all for watching. We'll be right back with more Focus on Abilities. Please stay tuned. Welcome back. This is Focus on Abilities. We're here today with Patricia Gray. Dr. Gray is a faculty member at the University of Houston and also a former state legislator. Patricia, when you talk about affecting these agencies, you wind up as a legislator, I'm sure, with a lot of pushback from the agencies themselves, who, as you mentioned, are comfortable with the role they're playing at any given time, and probably from some of their constituents who they, I guess, maybe I have a distorted view of this, but who maybe not involuntarily, but who are sort of encouraged by the agency that's serving them to speak up and try to defend turf at any given time. Legislators generally, while we sometimes accuse them of tinkering, they at least try to do things with good purpose, don't they?
I think generally they do. The problem comes when, because the legislature is very focused on process and definition and goal setting. And even though we don't want to make it a one-size-fits-all response to the served community, the people that we're trying to get the service to, sometimes it comes across that way. So when we're trying to decide who should get service and how they should access that service and how much service they should get and how long that service should take, we can butt heads sometimes. So is maybe the best way to put it.
Is the objective of that really to improve services? Is it to manage costs? Is it to protect people? Or all of the above?
It's all of the above. The reality is there are a finite amount of resources. And so I remember one of the battles when I was there was that the Commission for the Blind did not want to set a time frame on how long someone could stay at the state school to get training for someone who had had a sudden vision loss, to learn how to use adaptive equipment.
Sure, their argument is there are individual differences, and some people take longer than others.
Yes, and that makes perfectly good sense. But how long is long enough? When the legislature then tries to set a time frame, it can look very capricious to the person whose service may be cut off. And as budgets wax and wane, as they are richer and poorer, the legislature has to set priorities. So do you try to spread the dollars among the most people who can be served, or do you try to focus on those who need the service the most? There are arguments on both sides of that.
Well, I guess my concern as a constituent sometimes is that the legislature, whether they intend to do that or not, micromanages the service provider, the agencies. And I don't think legislators by and large have the depth of knowledge of that the people working inside the agencies do. So I agree with you, sometimes not capricious, but it looks arbitrary. And by the same token, I think consumers and constituents have to understand that the legislature is working within limits. And an economist once told me that the best way to manage costs in government service is to limit the number of people that get into the service in the first place. So what you've described is setting parameters on the front side and the back side, and to the extent necessary to adjust programs, I guess that's what agency directors have to do.
Well, and the legislature likes to think in terms of how do we make people more productive? But to the legislature, that may mean, can they get a job? To the constituent, that may mean, am I more self-sufficient? Am I able to stay in my own home longer? Am I able to move about in my community so that I don't have to go someplace where my movements may be more restrictive because somebody thinks I'll be safer there?
Well, I guess, maybe disability is an exception, or maybe we just see the same arguments as others do from a different perspective. But I would argue that in order to have a job and to do well at your job, you have to have some basic infrastructure. So, and that's what the rehabilitation programs are said. I'm sure you know this as well as I do at this point. In fact, some of the work that you've done to expand appropriate services for people in the state through Medicaid managed care, people complained about that in the beginning, but I have a lot of friends here who now use those services and find them to be valuable.
Well, and again, most of the pushback there was from the medical community, who didn't want to be told how to deal with individual patients. And they weren't looking at it from the perspective of, is there a better way that we can coordinate these services and work together to see that this patient's getting all of what they need, and that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing in the delivery of those services.
Well, I think that's a good example, because that in the case of Texas and the Medicaid managed care, other states look at us and try to model what we've done. Yes. And in my opinion, what the legislature did in granting authority to the agencies is to give them enough freedom that the companies providing the services can actually customize and provide client-directed services rather than one-size-fits-all. That was a breakthrough.
Yes. It's hard sometimes for the legislature not to put everything in terms of widgets. How many widgets do we need and how much are they going to cost? But people are not widgets. And so as legislators, we have to remember that we're not buying widgets, we're providing services to individuals, each of whom may have unique needs, and how do we make that process then work for all of those folks.
We're going to take another break, but when we come back, I'd like you to share with us your thoughts about how consumers, how individuals, how citizens can be most effective in communicating their needs and ideas that we may have about improving services to legislators. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Focus on Abilities. Welcome back to Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden. We're here with Patricia Gray. And Dr. Gray, Representative Gray, Patricia, we've talked about legislators and how they behave, but citizens have an obligation to communicate, I think, to their legislators. And if it's not an obligation, at least they have an opportunity to do that. Sometimes people only call legislators, in my experience, when they get angry about something, but they don't need to get angry if they talk to them before the fact, do they?
Well, they may, but yes, people should pay attention and know who represents them, and work when the legislature's not in session to develop a relationship with those people. You've been very effective in building relationships with some members up there who have a particular interest in the things that you're interested in. It also helps that you know the people who actually represent the district you live in, because legislators will pay attention to that more. But Harry Truman said the most powerful role in a democracy is that of citizen. And citizens have not only the right to, but in my view, the responsibility to communicate what they know and what they think their legislator needs to know. Legislators are not experts on everything, and we don't carry all this knowledge around in our heads. So when people have good ideas, they should share them. And don't be afraid to talk to staff. Sometimes the staff members in legislative offices do have special expertise. You may be surprised how expert they are. I've seen doctors do rotations in legislative offices just to get the policy experience. A lot of lawyers. I have a legislative fellow this time who has a lot of special training that may be very useful in this legislative cycle.
So the legislators are generally welcoming to constituents, particularly during the time the legislature is not in session. I think that's a good point. You shouldn't expect a call back from a legislator if they're on the floor actually working for you. But during the period between legislative sessions, it's their job in some respects, and it's their job future in others, that they do spend time with constituents and welcome them.
Yes. And for example, all during this interim leading up to this session, the Sunset Commission has been taking testimony related to these agencies that are up for review this time, which does include the agencies that directly impact people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm. So it's advisable for people to be in touch. The other thing I would say is don't be in touch just with the legislators when they're serving. I would recommend that people get involved with the political parties and they go to meetings in their community that are intended to lead toward the nomination process, and those precinct meetings are equally as important. Once you go there, you meet people who can introduce you to others.
That's true, and I can't tell you how many candidate forums I participated in as a candidate where we candidates outnumbered the audience.
Yeah.
So take advantage of those. Go. It's a time to ask questions. Put them on the spot. That's what they're there for.
You're currently interested in some issues that you and I share an interest in pertaining to technology and the development of technology and how we can use that. Where are we with that program?
Well, we have legislation drafted, and we've got some phone calls in to some folks to try to get them interested in it. I've heard you talk with others about being sure that people don't always have to come and sit in the doctor's office to get medical care, and so the legislation that we are particularly working on right now is expanding the ability to use telemedicine and telehealth technology to reach out into communities, keep people from having to make that drive into the medical center, spend whatever the cost is to park there. But there are other kinds of technology too. You know, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have really greatly accelerated changes in how we deal with people with catastrophic injuries. But those advances come with a very high dollar cost. And so one of the challenges that we're going to be facing in the future is how do we take advantage of those advances without breaking the bank, because those advantages help people maintain greater levels of self-sufficiency and actually hold great promise. As they're expanded, the cost will come down, but we've got to get over that first hurdle of getting them in place and then being able to expand them.
So are these current issues the legislature in Texas are considering?
Well, I think the current focus is going to be on more consolidation. I do think that the legislation that you've been advising our class on, dealing with advancing home telemonitoring and telehealth access, probably has a pretty good shot this time, because it provides a way to expand services in a really very inexpensive way.
Mm-hmm. So the opportunities for people now in the community are to communicate with their legislator, and it may be issues that go well beyond those we've talked about here. I mean, that's the job of legislators, as you pointed out. Not everybody can know everything about everything, and many times individuals who do have some knowledge affect the outcome of legislative action.
That's true. I mean, you wouldn't think that the Department of Transportation would have very much to do with disability issues, but they do, not only in the kinds of being able to get people around in the community, but little things. I mean, you pointed this one out to me one day. We pull our cars into the parking place. There's a concrete barrier there to keep us from parking on the sidewalk, but it lets the hood of our car go out completely over the sidewalk. Yeah. Since you pointed, which bars access for people with mobility issues on the sidewalk. And since you've pointed that out to me, I've been leaving little notes on people's cars saying, could you back up just a little bit the next time you park here?
I appreciate that. There's a lot to be done. And yes. Dr. Gray, your work now with the Health Law Policy Institute at the University of Houston, training new attorneys and new lawyers and others working in the field of medicine to work with the law to affect policy. And some of the people you've trained and will train are and will be state legislators. So thank you for that. If people are interested in the work of HLPI, the website they can reach more information?
law.uh.edu, and when you see when the page comes up, you look for academics and then institutes, and we are there, and you can see the news of everything we're working on, and we would love to hear from you.
The other thing you could do is just Google Health Law Policy Institute at the University of Houston, and you'll find it. I'm happy and proud to be an advisor there, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to work with you and your students. I want to thank all of you for watching Focus on Abilities today. Dr. Gray, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
It was my pleasure.
We'll be right back with some closing comments. You've been watching Focus on Abilities on HTV. I'm Lex Frieden. Our guest today has been Dr. Patricia Gray from the University of Houston Health Law Policy Institute. We've had a great discussion about the role of the legislature vis-a-vis programs for people with disabilities and others, and the role that citizens can play with the legislature. One of the objects that we talked about, or the organizations we mentioned, was the Sunset Commission in Texas, which plays a vital role in determining the future of these agencies. If you're interested, tune in for more information on your Google. Sunset Commission, Texas, and you'll see many of the issues that the legislators work on between the terms of their sessions. So, thanks for watching. It's HTV. Tune in next time for Focus on Abilities.
Focus on Abilities was brought to you by Tier Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence, and the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.